Shalom, people. Happy Hanukkah to everybody. This is a holy time, I believe, for everybody because the story is one that applies to all of us, and it's the story of great miracles happening. That as long as we believe and we eliminate any doubt that we might have in ourselves, any lack of faith that we might have, that miracles do happen. Miracles will happen if we believe. So happy Hanukkah and happy Festival of Lights to you. And Shabbat Shalom. So it's actually still Shabbat, and I'm making the video for this week's Torah portion, which is called Miketz. And it usually takes me some time to get this video to you guys, but today there was no Torah study because there are other events happening at the temple. So I happen to have the time right now to get the video done on Shabbat. So thank you for joining me on this day of Shabbat as we talk about this week's Torah portion, Miketz. And this portion is still about Joseph, Yaakov's son, Jacob's son, Joseph, his favorite son. Last week was Parshat Vayeshev, which spoke about Joseph's younger years. And a lot of what that spoke about was really Joseph's ego. And he has this gift, this God-given gift of dream interpretation. But when he was younger, in last week's portion, he wasn't quite good with that gift yet. He didn't really understand his gift yet. He was really in the egoic aspect and understanding of that gift. He was so excited about his gift of dream interpretation that he went around telling everybody about his great dreams. The main one we spoke about last week was this great dream that he had that one day everyone would bow to him, including all of his brothers. And again, he was very excited about this, and so he went around telling all of his brothers about it, and this didn't result in a very positive way because he was already the most loved son by his father, Yaakov, or Jacob. So he already was not looking so good in the eyes of his brothers. They were jealous of him. And then he goes on to boast about this great dream he had of them all bowing down to him one day. So his brothers ended up selling him into slavery. He ended up getting into trouble. Eventually he ended up in prison. And it was in the darkness of the prison cell that great light and wisdom came to him, and he realized that nothing is more important than love, that nothing is more important than the relationships that we build in those loving relationships with our family and with our friends. Then that brings us to this week's Parsha, which is Miketz, still about Joseph. But now Joseph is older and he's wiser. And he uses his gift of dream interpretation less selfishly. By acknowledging that he's only the vessel, he accesses true wisdom. So in the past, when he had these dreams, instead of, using the dreams for the highest good of the one, he was still caught up in the excitement of the gift itself. He was still caught up in his own self-reflection and just saying, wow, look what I can do, which is a very important part of the process. It's how we learn. Of course, things are exciting when they first come to us, and that is a part of the process. If we don't understand something in the dark, then we can't understand it in the light. And through understanding something as it relates to us, there lies a gateway to understanding how it relates to the all. So last week's story was about how his gift relates to himself, his smaller self. And this week, he learns how his gift relates to his larger self, of which all beings are a part. And so Pharaoh has these dreams, in this week's Torah portion. He has these dreams, and both of them provide the same message. He hears of Joseph's gift, and he calls him out of the jail cell, and he cleans him up, and he puts him in front of an audience, and he tells him about his dreams, and he says, hey, interpret my dreams. I hear that you are a master of this. And now Joseph is much more humbled in his older years, and he just came out of a prison cell. And so he's really remembering what is true, which is love. So he's using his gift in a righteous way. And so the message behind both of Pharaoh's dreams was the same. That, and this is how Joseph interprets it, that after 7 years of plenty, there will come 7 years of drought and famine. And he predicts correctly. And because he's considering the all and he's using his gift for the highest good, he's able to really connect with God because he knows he's a vessel for the message to come through, and it's not about just him. He accesses the true message of these dreams as it applies to all beings. That this drought, this famine is going to come, and so he instructs Pharaoh in such a way that he guides him to act upon the highest good for all. And Pharaoh sees how wise he is, and he says, you know what? I'm going to appoint you the overseer of storing and rationing the grain. So he rises up to this great position after all these years of struggle because of his, egoic consequences, the consequences of his egoic actions. But in the end, he learns his lesson and he rises up to power in some form in Egypt as the overseer of this project, this very important project, because famine is a very serious thing. All of the people's lives depended on the rationing of the grain. And he was appointed the position of overseer of this project. And so he ends up in this position of power. And years later, all of his brothers are sent by their father to come to Egypt and seek food because of the famine. Well, the brothers arrive without Benjamin, all the brothers except Benjamin. And they don't recognize their brother Joseph, whom they sold into slavery years ago. They probably think he's dead, right? And he recognizes his brothers. And he tells them that he's going to report them as spies. And he says, unless you bring Benjamin back with you, your final brother, I'm not going to believe you. And I'm going to tell the Pharaoh that you're spies here. And so they bring the final brother. And when they bring Benjamin, Joseph puts a goblet in his bag and frames him and says that he stole that goblet. He still doesn't reveal his identity as their brother. And so while this is happening, Judah, one of their brothers, sees all this and he says, you know what? I don't see this as a random happening. I don't see that this is just happening out of nowhere. Everything is connected. And we must be experiencing this now as a consequence of our actions long ago for what we did to our brother. And he's realizing this and he's coming to this vulnerable point of accepting that karma is very real. And this is before he even knows that Joseph, this man in power, is his brother. So he's genuinely, without being under pressure, he's holding sorrow and he's feeling sorry in his heart. He's genuinely repenting from within. In his heart, he's repenting. And God will feel that. God knows that because God is everywhere inside and out. So that's really important. That's a whole story of us coming to our understanding that our actions hold consequences. Okay. Joseph forgives them. He sees that his brothers are all being protective of each other, and he sees their bonds, and he sees how much they've matured since they sold him off into slavery many years ago as a child. He wants to repair their relationships. Joseph has become wiser and more mature himself, just like his brothers. And so he forgives them. And even after he forgives them, their brothers lie to him still. They partially accept his forgiveness, but they project onto him this idea that forgiveness can't possibly be real. And this happens in our relationships often, where when we don't forgive ourselves and we hold on to shame or we hold on to guilt, even if someone forgives us, we are not ready for that forgiveness because we have not forgiven ourselves. So we cannot be receptive. And we project all kinds of things onto the other person. When they're trying to forgive us, we just don't receive it. And we project, our own shame. We project our own guilt. There is resentment built within that. And so they continue to lie after he forgives them. And they say, our father, Yaakov, Jacob, he died. And he said before he died that you must forgive us when the time comes. Even though he already did. It's because they're still holding that shame. They're still holding that guilt. And they don't feel ready to forgive themselves. And so it's really important on both ends when there's an act happening where one has to forgive the other, that we truly feel that in our hearts and that we open up and we be receptive to that forgiveness in a way that we can be vulnerable. Everything out on the table, open communication, true forgiveness can only take place when we forgive ourselves. So a main lesson in this story is that our younger self, which it's not necessarily about age, okay? There are two sides, the young and the old, the ego and the higher self, okay? The mature and the not yet matured part of ourselves. When we act out of that egoic place, we're somewhat disconnected from God. In one realm, in a mental realm, ultimately we're always connected. But when we act for the self and we only consider the smaller self and not the larger self, we're limiting our power. We're not connecting to the source of our infinite abundance and our infinite power, which is in God, spirit, light, source. And so when we have a gift, which we all do, and we only think of how to use it for ourselves, selfishly, in a small way, and we don't acknowledge God, and we don't acknowledge where that gift came from, and we don't see ourselves as simply the vessel, that gift can only go so far. What we'll do with that gift could never be as great as it would be if we were to acknowledge that God gave us that gift and that it's really not even ours, but we're just here as the vessels for it to come through. Because when we do that, when we consider God and that we are just the vessel, we connect to that infinite source of power and abundance and love. And that is what flows through us to perform the greatest miracles. We're not going to be able to perform such great miracles when we're not considering that larger self that we're a part of. This is why the shamash, or the servant candle, is the most important one on the menorah or the Hanukkah. Because when we use our gifts, our light, to serve, then it comes right back to us. This is science. It comes right back to us. And it's showing the universe that I deserve this light because I'm going to use it to multiply the one light, the greatest light. Then it provides us with a light that is the most sustainable and eternally sustainable light, a flame that never goes out. So when we acknowledge that our gifts are from God and we give thanks for our gifts, the gift grows. And what it produces, what it manifests, what it creates is miraculous and much more powerful, eternally powerful, in fact, than it would have been if we used our gifts selfishly. So for this Hanukkah and for this Shabbat Parsha of Miketz, we learn that great miracles can and will happen when we believe and when we give thanks for where it's actually coming from. We give thanks for our gifts, whether your gift is like Joseph and you're an interpreter of dreams or whatever your gift is. When we acknowledge that we can use that gift for the greatest good, and that's why it was really given to us, then those miracles can happen. Thanks for tuning in for this week's Parsha. You can catch up on any that you missed if you go to youtube.com/Rebecca Magick. All of the Parshas are there, as well as yesterday's new moon and Hanukkah tarot reading for the collective, and lots of other fun goodies. Thank you. Many blessings, and Shabbat Shalom.